Hi, my name is Dale Maley. Today I'd like to tell you a very interesting story about a Thomas F. Googerty, a native of Pontiac, Illinois. I researched and gave this presentation to the Livingston County Historical Society, so I decided to convert it over to a YouTube video. When I started digging into his family tree, I was intrigued to find out that Thomas Googerty's grandfather was born in Ireland, came to Pontiac from Elgin, Illinois in 1850, making him a pioneer citizen of Pontiac. Now the railroad came through Pontiac in 1854, and he set up one of the first businesses in Pontiac, which is where he bought wood from farmers, and then he bandsawed it into the right lengths to sell to the railroad. Now I happen to have a drawing of what the first 1857 TP&W locomotive in Fairbury, what that looked like. I'm going to guess that this first Wabash Railroad in Pontiac had a similar looking locomotive. Once Thomas Googerty's grandfather was set up and established in Pontiac, he sent for his wife and son to join him. His son joined him in the wood business, which was very successful until coal replaced wood in the 1860s. The father of Thomas Googerty married Pontiac and started having children. Thomas was born in Pontiac around 1864. Unfortunately, though, tragedy struck in 1869 when Thomas's father was killed in a railroad accident, I believe in Pontiac, Illinois. So Tom's mother became a widow at the young age of 35, and she had to take care of 4 children under the ages of 7. Thomas Googerty went to the Pontiac Catholic grade school, but he quit at age 13 and was apprenticed to a local blacksmith. Then he spent around 14 years traveling around the country working at many different blacksmith-type jobs. We really don't know what cities he worked in. It's likely he went to Chicago because it was close by and there's probably a lot of work. In 1894, though, at the age of 30, he accepted the job as the forging and blacksmith instructor at the Illinois State Boys Reformatory in Pontiac. Now, the Illinois State Boys Reformatory was built in Pontiac in 1871, which eventually has morphed into what is now the Pontiac Prison. Now, the theory of the reformatory was you needed to educate young criminals, have them finish school, and teach them a trade. And once they learned a trade, they become productive citizens and not return to the prison system. And in 1 year, here's the different options they had, which were granite tombstone manufacturing, barbering, textile manufacturing, printing, carpentry, blacksmithing, which is what Thomas Googerty taught, pipe fitting, bricklaying, laundry work, engine work, electrical work, military drills, and farming. Those 13 trades were later expanded out to as many as 25. In 1894, the reformatory averaged 2,132 inmates. The youngest boys that year were 10 years old. About 80% of them ranged in between the ages of 16 and 20. And that year, 1,160 inmates were white and 210 were non-white boys. Now, in that year, the biannual report book said the boys had committed up to 53 different types of crimes, but about 3/4 of those were theft related, probably to steal money to get food or to steal food. That same year, 26 boys escaped from the reformatory, but 12 were captured, 3 voluntarily returned to the facility, and 11 were never caught. The 1894 inmate data indicated most of the boys came from broken homes, and their parents were of lower incomes and poorly educated. That year, 45% of the boys came from Cook County. But they bragged they had a 70% success rate over 5,000 boys that went to the reformatory. Now here's a rather rare photograph of instructor Thomas F. Googerty, shown in the middle, teaching 2 of the students at the reformatory the blacksmith trade. Now the boys' reformatory, they had to print up a book, and send it to the governor and state officials every 2 years. So they actually had their own printing plant to teach the boys printing. So they actually printed and made up their own books. They're very high quality. They have excellent photos. Here's a cover of one of them on the right. And the Historical Society is lucky to have 6 or 7 of these books dating from 1890 up to 1916. Here's a photograph from one of those biannual report books showing the blacksmith shop where the boys are learning the blacksmith trade. Thomas Googerty started to write about the blacksmith trade, and eventually he wrote over 50 blacksmithing relating articles for trade magazines and newspapers. Then he wrote 3 books about blacksmithing. First one was in 1911, then 1915, and 1937. And what's amazing is you can still buy all 3 of those books today from Amazon. In fact, the 1911 book is considered a seminal work on ornamental blacksmith work, and a lot of new blacksmiths buy this book because he tells them how to do the blacksmithing trade and has illustrations on making certain types of objects. Now let's take a moment and look at some of the types of ornamental iron objects he taught his students to make. On the left is some candlestick holders, and on the right are fireplace tools. On the left is another candlestick holder. On the right is 6 different types of drawer pulls that you would use to pull out and open drawers. Here's an ornamental electric lamp. Typically you would put colored glass in the top of that shade. Back in 1914, Thomas Googerty was elected to a craftsman member of Boston's prestigious Society of Arts and Crafts. Now, the arts and crafts movement in America went from roughly 1890 until 1915 or 20. So he would have been 50 years of age when he received that award. A couple years later, he was elevated to the rank of master craftsman in a few years. Thomas Googerty retired from full-time teaching at the Boys Reformatory in 1930, and he was 66 years old when he sort of semi-retired. But they wouldn't let him retire because he made over 5,000 locks for the reformatory, and they needed someone to keep repairing all those locks. He did volunteer to continue teaching part-time at the facility, but by 1930 he said he'd lost the feel of the hammer in his arm. So as Thomas Googerty aged and kind of quit doing hammering work in blacksmithing, he started to spend more time on another one of his hobbies, oil painting. And in 1940, Googerty and some other like-minded local artists formed the Amitytown Society of Painters to encourage students and sponsor exhibitions. He exhibited his paintings at the annual exhibition they had for the Amitytown Society. Let's take a moment and just look at some examples of Thomas Googerty's oil paintings. Here's the first one here, which is an older type house. Here's another of Googerty's oil paintings, this time a nature scene. Here's another nature scene. This group of painters like to go up on the Vermilion River up north of Pontiac around Cornell. That's actually Amity Township. That's where they got the name of Amitytown Painters. Now, the last major blacksmithing projects that Thomas Googerty was involved with, he designed the entrance gates for the Pontiac Southside Cemetery and St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery. He designed them, and then he directed students at the reformatory to make them. And what's amazing is both sets of gates are still in use today. Here's the Southside gate that Googerty designed at the Southside Cemetery in Pontiac. Now, my photographs taken last summer don't really do justice to how ornate and beautiful the decorations are on these gates. If you get a chance and you live in the area, and if you're in Pontiac, stop by the cemetery. It's the one just south of the Mill Street Bridge, over a little bit east, and stop and take a look. The flower petals are just amazing, how you could actually make those by hammering iron with a hammer, and they're just gorgeous. Thomas Googerty also designed the gates at the Pontiac St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery, and here's a photo of those. Thomas F. Googerty died in 1945. He lived to be 80 years of age. He donated his estate, which was worth more than $1.7 million in today's dollars, to the Pontiac St. Mary's Catholic Church. In his will, he stipulated that all the iron artifacts found in his house should be donated to the Chicago Art Institute. Now, Thomas Googerty had no surviving family members, but he did name an executor for his will. The executor found over 100 iron items that had been made by Googerty that he stashed in his house in Pontiac. He had carefully wrapped them in oily rags so they wouldn't rust, and they were stashed everywhere in the house. But somehow, only 19 out of those over 100 items were actually accessioned or given to the Chicago Art Institute. It remains a mystery, where did all those items go to? He was never married, he had no children, and he had no family in Pontiac when he died. So we really don't know what happened to all those artifacts. Pontiac native history professor Howard S. Miller, who's Pontiac, he met Thomas Googerty when Howard was just a small boy. But he was totally fascinated and he became a longtime Googerty history scholar. And in '99, he pushed for a special Googerty exhibit to be held at the National Ornamental Museum in Memphis. So in 1999, those Southside cemetery gates that we looked at, they were actually removed and trucked to Memphis. And there, some museum personnel refurbished the Googerty-made iron gates, and they were a main feature in the Googerty exhibition at Memphis. When that was over, the items went to the Lakeside Museum in Peoria for a few weeks, and when that was finished, they actually did some exhibits at the Yost House and the Bank of Pontiac. In the summer of 2025, a new permanent Googerty Room display was set up in the Strevell House in Pontiac by the Livingston County Historical Society. Here's a photograph of the newly opened Googerty Room in the Strevell House at Pontiac. We have all of his dozen or so paintings that we have in the collection are all hung on the wall. A mock fireplace was built so we could install a iron grate that was actually made by Googerty. And then his logo that he used to stamp on his items, TG, we actually incorporated that into the mock fireplace as well. Here's a photo of a display case that was built and donated to the Historical Society to display Thomas Googerty related items in the new room upstairs at the Strevell House in Pontiac. When we were setting up this new Googerty Room, one of the questions that arose is, how do you display Googerty iron-made items that either he designed or he had his students build to his designs? And we only have a few items in the archives of the Historical Society. We have a fireplace screen, we have a lamp that has stained glass in it, and we have 2 long forks. Then at that Memphis museum, there's only about 6 items known to exist in the world that he either designed or made. And based on the 1999 stories, some local families may still have some Googerty iron-made items, but they may not realize they even have them. So how do we demonstrate the truly artistic abilities of Thomas Googerty in this new exhibit room? Since we can't get any iron artifacts, why not 3D print some plastic ones using his drawings and dimensions from his books? So we went to his books and we found some photos or drawings. We redrew those in a modern SketchUp drafting program. We made the right output file so we could send that to a company that could 3D print those in plastic. And we ended up making a simple drawer pull, an ornamental hinge, and a dragon head door knocker. They're all on display in the new Googerty Room. Now, before we had electricity and electric doorbells, mechanical door knockers were very popular to have on front doors, and they were very popular around 1910. And Thomas Googerty made this fascinating one with a dragon's head on it, but we only have a photo that came from the 1999 Googerty exhibit down in Memphis. So we just have this photo, we have no drawings or dimensions. We were able to use a new artificial intelligence program to convert that photo over to a file that could be 3D printed in plastic. And we got the two plastic pieces. We drilled a 1/4-inch hole for the pin where it rotates, and it's very functional, and it actually makes a knocking sound when you use it. It was really quite a fascinating journey to figure out how to take an old photograph of that dragon head door knocker and go through all the steps to end up with a really nice plastic printed version of it, which is functional, and visitors can appreciate the artistic ability of Thomas Googerty when they see it in the new exhibit room in the Strevell House in Pontiac. Now for some closing thoughts on this presentation about the life of Thomas Googerty. It turns out that the Googerty family were actually pioneer settlers of Pontiac, and with his grandfather arriving in 1850 before the railroads even came through in 1854. Thomas himself was born and raised in Pontiac. He went on to become a nationally known figure in the ornamental iron field. He authored over 50 magazine articles about forging and ornamental ironworking, as well as 3 books. His 1911 book is still referred to by modern blacksmiths. And with his students, Googerty designed and built the iron gates at the Pontiac Southside Cemetery and the St. Mary's Cemetery, and these gates are still in use today. Thomas Googerty was also one of the founding members of the Amitytown Painter Society, and many of his paintings still survive today. It is hoped the new book that will written will help inform future generations about the history of the Googerty family and the national prominence of Thomas F. Googerty. The new Googerty Room in the Strevell House helps to preserve his story. It's usually open from 1 to 3 p.m. on the 3rd Saturday of the month from April through November. There's no admission charge. You can also visit the Yost, Jones, and Strevell houses in the 2-hour window every 3rd Saturday. So this is the last slide in the presentation. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out my other YouTube videos. I have quite a few history-related videos. Thanks again for watching. Please subscribe, and thanks.